I got the receipts, and today I'm revealing every dollar I've spent so far in my home renovation. If you missed episode 1 of the Reno Diaries, you can check that out via the link above that has a little background information. But in today's video, we're going to talk about the expenses incurred in phase 1A. This was essentially refinishing the ceiling, floor, and the walls of my 980 square foot home. I estimated about $3,000 for my equipment and materials that I'd be using. But as I went through the receipts to put together this video, I realized that there were some expense categories I hadn't really accounted for. Those categories turned out to be hired labor, equipment, materials and applications, supplies, and then a few miscellaneous items. Category 1, hired labor. Initially, when I started this whole process, I had this very romantic, like under the Tuscan sun vision of doing the work myself. But I quickly realized that there are some things that are just better left to the pros. And this was one of them. So I hired someone to refinish my ceilings from a popcorn texture to a knockdown texture. This cost me $1,400, and while it may seem like an unnecessary expense to some people, I really hate the look of popcorn ceilings, and so it was really worth it to me. I did get a $200 discount by dry scraping like the popcorn projections myself. And I will say this was money very well spent because the ceiling looks great and it's so much better than what I had anticipated. This category number 2. I rented various members of the sanding family. I rented a drum sander, a floor edger, otherwise known as a handheld drum sander, and an orbital sander. In total, I spent $709.45 on rentals. I was able to save a little bit because I did have access to a palm sander, which I owned from doing a previous furniture renovation project, as well as an oscillating tool that helps you just get into all the little corners and crevices. I will say if you have a job that you will be repeatedly using a tool that is at a price point that just makes more sense to purchase than to rent, absolutely do that. It did not make sense for me to purchase an orbital sander. I will never sand another floor again. I guess you never should say never. But if you can purchase something lightly used on your local classified ads or Facebook Marketplace, you can borrow something from a friend, that will help. Also, if you purchase a small tool that you don't think you're going to use again, you can always resell it afterwards for a slightly reduced fee, and that would help someone else out also. I was able to save some money with the equipment rentals by doing pickups and drop-offs ourselves. It was $50 each direction for the delivery. So I did about 4 or 5 rentals, so that would save you about $800 to $1,000. One thing I had not fully considered with equipment rentals is the cost of some consumable items. In my situation, this was a backup pad that goes on the metal plate of the sander and then the sandpaper itself. I did include these in the rental costs because I purchased them through the rental agency and I didn't really want to tease them out into supplies. While you might think the cost of purchasing from the rental agency would be a little bit higher than sourcing your own materials at a big box store, it actually worked out to be not that big of a difference. And the convenience of getting it on site at the rental agency specific to the machine that you had was a huge time saver. I had previously rented this overhead orbital sander with holes at certain points, and it's really important that you get the right discs because it allows the dust to suction through properly to keep the motor running. So going with the rental agency's products is probably better. It saves you the time of going to the big box store or ordering them online while you have the sander in your possession and you're paying for the day rental. Just get it at the rental agency if they offer that. The way it works is they gave me like 10 sheets of 4 different grits of sandpaper. And whatever I used would be charged to my account, and whatever I return obviously would be refunded from the deposit. So if I was given 10 sheets of 36 grit paper and I used 6 of them, then I'm only paying for the 6 I used. This is also a difference than if you bought like a 20 pack at Home Depot. Well, you're now going to be left with like 14 sheets of sandpaper that you don't need. So it's better to just pay for what you actually use. It's far more convenient. And while we may take on some work ourselves in the renovation process, you don't want to make your life harder or ignore the cost of your time and convenience. Expense category 3 was material applications. Now, I'm defining this as anything that has a finish that's like our final finish. So this would include the paint used and the stain for my floors. I did make a previous video that talks in greater depth about materials and applications, and that's in the 3 essential tips to a successful home renovation. So you may want to look at that video also. One of the costs under this umbrella of materials and applications is samples. I spent a total of $129.28 on just samples. These are samples like paint and stain samples in different finishes and in different colors. The total I spent on materials and applications was $1,520.12. This accounted for paint primer, paint itself, wood cleaner for the floors to prep them for staining, the stain itself, and post-stain cleaner. So in total, for material applications, I spent $1,649.40. Spend the time testing. Test your paints, test your stains on the actual material that you'll use. Don't just do like a small little board or something. Like if you have a red oak sample that's not your floor, test it on your actual floor, because just because it's the same species, like my house was built in 1964. The red oak in this floor is going to be very different than a freshly lumbered piece of red oak that I use at the store when I'm testing a sample. So test it on your actual surface that you'll be using in an inconspicuous area. For example, when I tested the stain, I did it in the closet. But also make sure that it's an area that's going to get a lot of light. So I tested it in a closet, that in a room where the light came in through the window and shone into the closet. When you're testing your samples, test them in natural light, test them in artificial light at different times of day. If you can like run your tests and your little experiment and document your observations over a number of days, this is going to give you a better measure of the color and how the finish will appear in different conditions, whether it's cloudy on one day, bright and sunny on another, partially cloudy, as well what it looks like at 6 a.m. in the morning versus 6 p.m. in the evening. This is going to provide you very valuable feedback, and it's going to help you get your colors right. I know it's tempting to just purchase something in the store, but the only thing to purchase right away is a sample. And one quick note about the ceiling. The $1,400 I quoted earlier, that included the materials for the ceiling. So there was like a primer and this type of mud that he applied. And we talked about the colors. I would. We talked about the colors before he did it, and so he selected it based on what I wanted as a finished result. I can also do a future video on estimating the quantities of materials needed. That will directly impact your estimated expenses and of course your budget. Expense category number 4, supplies and PPE. I wanted to separate supplies and personal protective equipment out from other expense categories. And initially, I think I included this in things like materials, but they aren't really materials for the project, like for the finished project itself. They're in support of. These are things like applicator pads, paint rollers, brushes, the paint thinner to clean your brushes. Like they don't really belong in with materials. The same goes with personal protective equipment, earplugs or dust masks, goggles, shoe covers, cleaners that you use. These are almost like hidden expenses involved in a renovation that I hadn't fully realized as part of the process. Like I knew I'd have to buy paint rollers, but when you're testing paint, for example, and you have to use a new roller for every paint sample, you're going through those rollers pretty quickly. So you're like, oh, well, I only bought rollers for applying the paint. I didn't really think through the testing part of it. I did spend a total of $523.92 on materials. That was a surprising amount to me. That's like a flight, you know? So that's something definitely account for in your budget. I will add that not everything I purchased was fully used. So now I have like a nice little Y2K or COVID stash of um, dust masks and more blue shop towels than I know what to do with. But these are things that I can use for future projects, and like leftover paint I can use for touch-ups or um, using in small and conspicuous areas like painting insides of closets, things like that. Our last category, expense category number 5, is miscellaneous costs. And these were costs where I didn't know where else to kind of put them. The only one I had was a $25 fee for taking things to my local city dump. And this was largely, it was like the rolls of carpet that we pulled up from tearing that out. My city doesn't charge for disposal of like paint cans and things like that. Double check if yours does, and always make sure that you dispose of like any type of chemical like that responsibly. When we look at the waste that's produced by the construction and home renovation kind of category of things, it's a very daunting number. So we want to be responsible in how we use materials at all times. So my grand total was $4,107.76. Now, there may be an expense that I've missed, an expense or two that I've missed. In general, it's in this ballpark. Comparing that $4,100 to my $3,000 initial estimate, I will say at the time I kind of anticipated spending $3,000. I hadn't yet accounted for hiring out labor to do the ceiling refinishing. So, all in all, I'm fairly close, like I'm in the right range of things. But as I move forward in the renovation and I have that information of other expense categories that I mentioned and brought up, I'm going to account for, a little extra more to buffer my anticipated costs. I'm really happy with how Phase 1A has turned out so far. Phase 1B is going to be the finishing work of Phase 1A. This includes things like the trim for doorways and windows, the baseboards in the house, light switch covers, cold air return covers, things like that. And some of this work has already begun, but I probably won't finish it up for a couple of weeks. And now I'm busy with the YouTube channel as well as trying to renovate and do my job. So I will do my best to stay consistent. I'm Sarah. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. If it was helpful to you, please hit that like button so I know, and I hope that you'll follow along with the Reno Diaries by hitting that subscribe button. Thanks, and see you on the next one.